In the late autumn of 2001, Microsoft made the most aggressive and financially dangerous gamble in the history of consumer technology. The computing titan was moving onto foreign turf, the home video game console market. Sony's PlayStation 2 was dominating living rooms globally, and Microsoft recognized that if a non-Windows machine became the primary digital entertainment hub, their desktop computing monopoly faced an existential threat. Microsoft's strategic response was brute force industrial scale. They poured over $2 billion into the development, manufacturing, and marketing of the original Xbox. But the core of their business strategy was built on a razor and blades business model taken to an extreme. Microsoft manufactured each Xbox console for roughly $425, while selling it at retail for just $299. Every single unit leaving the assembly line represented a direct, immediate loss of over $100. The entire financial viability of the project depended on software licensing. Microsoft planned to recoup its billions by charging game developers hefty royalties on every title sold. But this model contained one fatal vulnerability. If a user could bypass the system's internal security, they could turn a heavily subsidized $299 high-performance machine into a cheap desktop computer, or worse, run unsigned, pirated game software without paying a dime. To protect their investment, Microsoft couldn't merely build a game console. They had to engineer a locked cryptographic appliance, an iron box where every single byte of code had to be mathematically verified before the hardware would allow it to run. Unlike Sony or Nintendo, who built exotic, custom silicon architectures like the PlayStation 2's Emotion engine, Microsoft built the Xbox out of standard commodity PC hardware. Underneath the bulky black and green casing sat a custom 733 MHz Intel Pentium 3 derived processor, an NVIDIA NV20 graphics processing unit, an IDE hard drive, and a standard desktop DVD-ROM drive. To software engineers at Microsoft, using an x86 architecture was an immense operational advantage. It allowed game developers to write code using familiar DRX APIs and standard Windows-based development tools. But to the hardware security team, x86 was an absolute nightmare. For over 2 decades, the x86 architecture had been intentionally engineered as an open, accessible platform. Its boot procedures, memory mapping, and bus communications were thoroughly documented and understood by every reverse engineer on the planet. Standard x86 processors were hard-coded to follow a strict boot sequence. The instant they received power, the CPU executed its reset vector, fetching its very first instruction from memory address FFFFFFF0. In a standard desktop PC, address FFFFFF0 points directly to an external flash BIOS chip soldered onto the motherboard. Microsoft's engineers knew that if the Xbox followed standard x86 conventions, an attacker could simply desolder the flash ROM, dump its contents using an off-the-shelf chip reader, modify the BIOS to disable signature checks, and solder a custom chip back onto the board. If the Xbox was going to survive on an open x86 foundation, Microsoft had to completely destroy the open nature of the architecture. To lock down the x86 platform, Microsoft designed what security architects call a continuous chain of trust. The fundamental principle of a chain of trust is simple. Every piece of code must cryptographically verify the next piece of code before handing over execution control. If a single link in the chain fails its signature check, the hardware halts instantly. The root of this chain, the absolute foundation upon which all security relied, was the secret boot sequence. Instead of allowing the CPU to talk directly to external motherboard chips at startup, Microsoft engineered a multi-stage hardware hijack. When you pressed the power button, the Intel CPU powered up and immediately requested its first instruction from the standard x86 reset vector at address FFFFFFF0. Under normal circumstances, that request would travel out across the motherboard directly to an external memory chip. But Microsoft built a trap inside the NVDI MCPX Southbridge chip. The MCPX intercepted the CPU's request before it ever reached the motherboard traces, forcing the processor to execute code from a secret 512-byte ROM buried deep inside the Southbridge silicon itself. Inside this hidden 512-byte ROM sat a hard-coded 128-bit RC4 key. The secret ROM executed a custom bytecode interpreter called X-Codes, read encrypted data from the physical flash chip on the motherboard, and used the 128-bit key to decrypt the payload on the fly. This decrypted payload was the second-stage bootloader. Once the hidden ROM verified that the bootloader was authentic, the system loaded it into main RAM. The bootloader then initialized system hardware, decrypted the Windows-derived kernel, and unlocked the console for play. As cryptographer Bruce Schneier noted when analyzing the architecture, when you put the hardware in the user's hands, traditional cryptographic boundaries shift entirely. Microsoft built a mathematical vault inside silicon, assuming the user could never observe the internal arithmetic. Mathematically, the vault was pristine. Brute forcing a 128-bit RC4 key would require billions of supercomputers running for trillions of years. To further frustrate reverse engineers, Microsoft added a layer of psychological warfare to their hardware design, the decoy ROM. When early hackers desoldered the 1MB TSOP flash memory chip from the Xbox motherboard and dumped its contents using standard chip programmers, they thought they had found the boot code. The flash chip contained what appeared to be a completely valid x86 reset vector, complete with initialization subroutines and pseudo-cryptographic routines. Hackers spent weeks analyzing this dump, attempting to patch the code and reflash the chip. But no matter what modifications they made, the console continued to boot normally, or refused to boot at all in unpredictable ways. The flash ROM was a dummy. The code inside it was never executed during the initial boot phase. The real boot routine was running entirely from inside the secret 512-byte MCPX Southbridge silicon, passing instructions to the CPU before the external flash chip was ever initialized. To the wider security community in late 2001, the Xbox appeared truly uncrackable. The master key was locked inside custom silicon, guarded by 128-bit stream ciphers, and shielded by decoy code. Microsoft's software architects celebrated a major victory. They had forgotten one fundamental truth. Software is an abstraction, but hardware is physics. While corporate security teams celebrated, an MIT PhD candidate in electrical engineering named Andrew "Bunnie" Huang received an original Xbox as a gift in December 2001. Bunnie did not view the Xbox through the lens of software engineering. He was a specialist in computer architecture, silicon fabrication, and hardware design at MIT's Artificial Intelligence Laboratory. Where software engineers saw mathematical ciphers, Bunnie saw circuit boards, voltage levels, clock cycles, and copper traces. Bunnie's first experiment targeted the decoy ROM. He desoldered the external flash chip and deliberately corrupted the x86 reset vector at address FFFFFF0. When he powered the system on, the Xbox booted cleanly into the main dashboard anyway. This confirmed his initial hypothesis. The CPU was fetching its first instructions from an undocumented internal ROM hidden inside the Southbridge silicon. Standard hardware analysis suggested that extracting code from internal silicon required a high-end semiconductor laboratory. An attacker would typically decap the chip package using fuming nitric acid and inspect the physical metal interconnects under a scanning electron microscope. However, the NVIDIA MCP-X chip was fabricated on a 0.15 micron process using 7 distinct metal routing layers. The hidden 512-byte ROM was buried beneath 6 dense layers of copper interconnects, making optical and electron microscope inspection impossible without destructive chemical polishing that costs tens of thousands of dollars and often ruined the sample. Bunnie knew there had to be a cheaper way. He understood a core rule of hardware. No matter how secure code is inside a chip, silicon cannot compute in isolation. At some point, the CPU has to communicate with the rest of the board. The flaw in Microsoft's strategy lay in the physical mechanics of x86 motherboards. When the hidden 512-byte MCP-X ROM inside the South Bridge initialized the system, it had to send commands, memory addresses, and decrypted data payloads to the Intel CPU and main system RAM. Those signals couldn't travel through telepathy. They had to travel as physical electrical pulses across copper traces etched into the fiberglass motherboard. Software engineers build mathematical locks operating on abstract ones and zeros. Hardware hackers operate on electrons. An electric pulse moving along a copper trace at 3.3 volts represents a binary 1. A signal at 0 volts represents a binary 0. If an attacker could monitor those copper traces with microsecond precision during the exact window of system boot, they wouldn't need to break 128-bit RC4 encryption. They wouldn't need to decap the chip or spend thousands of dollars at a semiconductor lab. As Bunnie later reflected in his book, Hacking the Xbox, "I didn't break their math, I just tapped into the conversation." They could simply record the electricity as it left the vault and read the decrypted keys directly out of physical space. To execute a physical eavesdropping attack, Bunnie had to select a target bus on the motherboard. The primary interconnect between the NVIDIA GPU and the MCP-X South Bridge was a high-speed hypertransport bus operating at a clock frequency of 400 MHz DDR. Sniffing a 400 MHz bus in 2002 was practically impossible without commercial logic analyzers costing upwards of $30,000, a sum far beyond the reach of a graduate student. However, Microsoft's manufacturing requirements introduced a critical architectural vulnerability. During mass production, assembly line technicians needed a way to test motherboard chips, flash system firmware, and run factory diagnostics without relying on complex high-speed interfaces. To facilitate this, Microsoft integrated a legacy low pin count or LPC debug bus running at a modest 33 MHz. The LPC bus traces were wired directly to the South Bridge and routed to an unpopulated expansion footprint on the motherboard. When the hidden internal ROM executed, it mirrored its initialization traffic and bytecode transfers across this legacy 33 MHz bus. Microsoft built a 400 MHz silicon wall, but left a 33 MHz debug window open on the circuit board because removing it would have increased manufacturing costs at the factory. Without access to a $30,000 logic analyzer, Bunnie designed his own high-speed bus sniffer using off-the-shelf consumer components for roughly $50. The physical execution required extreme mechanical precision. The target LPC bus traces on the Xbox motherboard were microscopic copper lines buried beneath a protective layer of green solder mask lacquer. Working under a stereo microscope, Bunnie used fine grit sandpaper and a surgical steel X-Acto knife to carefully scrape away the green lacquer, exposing raw, shiny copper traces no wider than a human hair. Next, he designed a custom miniature circuit board called the tap board. Using a belt sander, he ground down the edge of the board to a razor-thin bevel, allowing its copper contact fingers to line up perfectly with the exposed traces on the motherboard. To secure the physical connection against vibration and thermal expansion, he locked the tap board to the Xbox motherboard using 2-part Miller-Stevenson epoxy 907. The tap board was wired directly to a low-cost Xilinx Spartan 2 FPGA evaluation board paired with a high-speed static RAM capture buffer. The FPGA was programmed to act as a high-speed digital logic recorder, sitting silently in memory until it detected the precise voltage drop that signaled a system reset. Bunnie had built a precision high-speed wiretap for $50. On a cold night in February 2002, Bunnie connected his custom FPGA tap board to a monitoring PC, placed his probes, and flipped the power switch on the modified Xbox. In less than 50 microseconds, electrical current surged through the motherboard traces. The Intel CPU issued its reset command. The MCPX South Bridge mapped its secret internal ROM, and the system began executing its encrypted boot routine. As the electrical pulses moved across the 33 MHz LPC bus, Bunnie's $50 FPGA captured every high and low voltage transition, storing the raw binary stream directly into high-speed SRAM. When Bunnie transferred the capture dump to his computer and opened it in a hex editor, the hidden 512-byte MCPX boot block was sitting in plain, unencrypted text. Inside those 512 bytes lay the complete architectural schematic of Microsoft's hardware security. Exposed in plain text was the hard-coded master 128-bit RC4 encryption key, the complete implementation of the secret X-Code's bytecode interpreter, and the exact memory initialization parameters used to configure the system kernel. Microsoft's multi-billion-dollar vault had been stripped completely bare in under 50 microseconds. With the secret 512-byte ROM extracted, the global reverse engineering community immediately began analyzing the code. What they discovered was a series of fundamental cryptographic design errors. First was the RC4 cipher malleability. Microsoft used the RC4 stream cipher to encrypt the second-stage bootloader, but they omitted a cryptographic hash or message authentication code, such as SHA-1 or HMAC, to verify payload integrity. Instead, the secret ROM decrypted the payload and checked if the final 4 bytes matched a static unencrypted magic number, 0x785749J. Because stream ciphers are linear, attackers realized they could perform bit flipping attacks. By modifying specific bits in the encrypted flash ROM file and adjusting corresponding bits downstream, hackers could alter the executable code without invalidating the static 32-bit magic number check. Second was the Intel CPU wraparound bug, historically known as the visor exploit. If the secret ROM detected an invalid payload, it was programmed to trigger a hardware panic by jumping to memory location FFFFFFFF. On AMD development chips, this instruction halted processor execution entirely. But on retail Intel Celeron processors, execution did not halt. Instead, the memory address wrapped around past the top of the 32-bit address space, rolling over directly to address 000000000. Address 000000000 mapped straight back to the user-controllable, unencrypted external flash ROM. Microsoft's own panic routine handed complete execution control of the machine directly back to the hacker. Third was the missed hack, which exploited the X-code interpreter's memory masking checks. The interpreter attempted to prevent arbitrary PCI configuration rights by checking memory address bounds. However, the check evaluated 32-bit integers, while the physical PCI controller ignored the upper bits, allowing attackers to pass aliased addresses and disable the internal ROM on command. Within 3 months of release, the Xbox hardware security architecture had completely collapsed. Extracting the code was a monumental technical achievement, but publishing it ignited a high-stakes legal crisis. In 1998, the United States Congress passed the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, or DMCA. Section 1201 made it a federal crime to circumvent any technological measure that controlled access to copyrighted works. When news broke that an MIT graduate student had extracted Microsoft's master boot key and mapped its internal silicon security, corporate legal pressure intensified rapidly. Fearing multi-million-dollar lawsuits and legal precedent, MIT's Central Legal Counsel panicked. The university issued an official letter formally disavowing Bunnie's research, refusing to provide legal defense, and advising him to seek independent criminal defense representation. Bunnie was left entirely isolated, a graduate student facing potential federal prosecution and financial ruin over 512 bytes of code. However, faculty members at the MIT Artificial Intelligence Laboratory refused to stand down. Led by legendary computer scientist Hal Abelson, the AI lab faculty recognized that if corporate legal threats could suppress academic research into hardware security, scientific inquiry itself was at risk. As Abelson forcefully argued during internal university deliberations, academic freedom exists precisely to protect researchers when powerful commercial interests want to dictate what mathematics can and cannot be published. On May 26, 2002, in direct defiance of university central counsel, the MIT AI Lab published Bunnie's findings as an official academic paper, AI Memo 002-008, Keeping Secrets in Hardware, the Xbox Case Study. By self-publishing the work through the AI Lab's independent technical memo series, the faculty bypassed the central administration's publishing ban and extended academic freedom protections to Bunnie. Facing public backlash over prosecuting a university researcher over a computer architecture paper, Microsoft chose not to file suit. Bunnie later published his complete technical journey in the book Hacking the Xbox, An Introduction to Reverse Engineering. It quickly became the foundational textbook for an entire generation of hardware security researchers, silicon engineers, and embedded systems hackers. The lessons of the original Xbox forced the tech industry to redefine its approach to silicon security. When Microsoft built the Xbox 360, they abandoned external debug buses, integrated eFuses directly into the CPU core, and implemented post-bus cryptographically signed timing checks. Yet, as history would reveal, even the Xbox 360's hardware security was eventually broken by post-bus timing glitches on physical motherboard traces. The story of the $50 tapboard established an enduring truth in modern hardware security, famously summarized by security researcher Edward Snowden in Permanent Record. Hardware is a world without secrets. If you go deep enough, even the most important key is expressed in silicon or fuses. Software architects can construct abstract mathematical fortresses. They can deploy multi-layered ciphers, hidden memory regions, and complex signature verification routines. If you appreciate deep-dive technical documentaries that explore the physical realities of hardware security, hit the subscribe button, leave a like, and drop a comment below letting us know which console exploit story we should investigate next. Because as long as code relies on physical silicon, copper traces, and moving electrons to execute, the ultimate rule of computing remains absolute. Electricity cannot keep a secret.